Bill O'Reilly, who is the host of the very popular cable television program called The Factor, and he has named the No Spin Zone, recently interviewed Sarah Palin. Now, I know a lot of you have been upset with me about some of the things I've said about Sarah Palin, but I'm not here to degrade her. And today I'm here to praise her and to uplift her. I got some really wonderful and kind things to say about Sarah Palin. But Bill O'Reilly interviewed her, and if you get an opportunity, I want to just show you that first interview that took place the last 24 hours, that was broadcast 24 hours ago. And Bill O'Reilly had her not at his normal anchor desk, but in a setting of an office space or some sort of a place that would be a lounge or library, and they were seated in two different seats. And the seats were facing one another. And there were just comfortable chairs where you could turn them to, and you could face as he did his process of interviewing her. And she was seated there. And I noticed when the camera was on her, she looked very tense. There were a lot of wrinkles on her nose, and she didn't have that ebullient joyfulness that is so trademark Sarah Palin. And even though she was trying to smile and trying to be joyful and light of spirit, I sensed as the camera was on her that something was amiss, that she wasn't communicating that joyfulness that has become so much her trademark. And the interview went back and forth, and O'Reilly was asking her questions, and she was responding, and he wasn't belligerent to her in any way of the questions. Some of the questions were very poignant, and I thought they were good questions. But then the camera panned on Bill O'Reilly as he was seated in his chair directly across from her. And he was seated there in his chair. The thing that caught my attention immediately was that his legs were wide open, wearing pants, obviously, a jacket, but he had his legs wide open. I mean, they were like 3 feet apart between his knees. And his crotch was right there. You can see it. You can see what I'm talking about. And she having to look directly at him, and if her eyes fall down, she has to look at his crotch. And he kept his legs wide open. Now, let me tell you why this is important to me. I'm a pastor, and I deal in the church, and oftentimes we have men seated on the front row of a church, and then we have a choir seated behind us, and sometimes a young girl and women in the choir. And men would come from time to time, and I see it in other churches, and sit with their legs wide open. And sometimes with their crotches, you can see imprints and things of that nature. And I said, we're not going to have the choir members sitting up in the choir looking down onto the men's crotch with their legs wide open like that. So I took measures in our church to stop that. However, I go to other churches and I see men love to sit there with the imprint of their crotch showing, and the choir members sitting up in the choir, they're sitting on the front row showing. I think it's repulsive, it's ugly, it's degrading, it's despicable that men do that. Open their legs wide open. Just cross your legs or sit in such a way as it doesn't reveal your crotch. Bill O'Reilly, who is, I believe he's a sex maniac. And the things I've read about him, about his sexual habits, about his sexual harassment, and I believe he's got really deep-seated sexual problems. What Sarah Palin was experiencing, what made her so tense, she was experiencing his sexual aggressiveness. I would never sit in front of a woman like that. And I would never let a man sit in front of my wife like that. No, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not going to do that. And she was tense as a result of it. Now, Bill O'Reilly made a comment about Charlie Gibson seated with his legs crossed appropriately, but looking down his nose through his glasses at Sarah Palin when he was interviewing her last year during the time of the campaign. And O'Reilly pointed out that Charlie Gibson's body posture was insulting. It was degrading. It was condescending, and it got him in a lot of trouble because he was really just looking down his nose at Sarah Palin, and Bill O'Reilly was right in describing the body language of Charlie Gibson, and you can see it right there. There it is. There is the event that was discussed. Look at the arrogance of Charlie Gibson looking down his nose, but at the very least, he's got his legs closed so his crotch is not in the woman's face. But now let's go back to Bill O'Reilly. Look at this man. He's got his crotch in this woman's face. Now his tie is hanging down right into the crotch shot. This is ridiculous. This is barbaric. This is sexual assault on Sarah Palin. I know she couldn't wait to get out of that chair and stop having to look at that man's crotch. Bill O'Reilly is a sicko. I mean, he is a sexually aggressive sicko. And I'll tell you, don't let your women go anywhere near this sex maniac. He was aggressively challenging this woman sexually, aggressively. He was intimidating her. You ought to be banned from any public service, any public arena. This was ugly. If you believe Charlie Gibson, and Bill O'Reilly himself said Charlie Gibson was ugly, this is beyond ugly. This is subterranean, despicable Bill O'Reilly challenging Sarah Palin, making that woman feel uncomfortable with his crotch shown. And let me say a word for Sarah Palin. I've watched this woman for over a year. I've never seen her flirt with anybody, even when she was, walking very closely with John McCain. She's been interviewed by a large number of people. I've never seen this woman flirt or be flirtatious. She has been sane and chaste and reverent and a woman of character and integrity. And I'll always give her that, always, with respect to her sexuality. And she's a pretty woman. She's a beautiful, she's hot, Sarah Palin is. But what Bill O'Reilly did by opening up his crotch and putting his crotch in that woman's face like that is despicable. And all women in America, the women's movement, the now women and women who are federated together ought to ban Bill O'Reilly from ever having contact. We ought to label him a sexual pervert and put him on the sexual perverse list, that he should never be able to be in the presence of any woman, challenging that woman with his legs wide open like that. And by the way, the proof is in the pudding. If Charlie Gibson was arrogant, Bill O'Reilly was despicable. I'm James David Manning, Mr. O'Reilly, and this is the Manning Report. Allah. That's what God said. That's what God said.